Emma's hands shook as she pressed them against the cool surface of the dining table. Her heart raced so wildly she feared it might burst through her chest. For what felt like an eternity, she had stared at Daniel, unable to find words strong enough to push away the feelings he had unearthed her, the confession he had laid bare in the quiet of the night. Daniel remained where he had been, standing across from her, his eyes soft yet intense, holding a vulnerability that made her ache in ways she hadn't expected. He wasn't trying to corner her or to demand anything of her. He simply existed, quietly honest, and the weight of that honesty pressed against her heart. For a long moment, the room was heavy with silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. It was a cruel rhythm, marking every second she spent battling the confusing storm within herself. She wanted to tell him to leave, to go back to being just her nephew, just family. Yet when she opened her mouth, the words caught in her throat. "I can't," she whispered finally, her voice trembling. This can't happen, Daniel. You know that." And yet her voice faltered, as if admitting even a fraction of the truth was dangerous. He stepped closer, but not too close, just enough to let her know he understood that he wasn't asking her to step over boundaries she wasn't ready to cross. "I don't expect anything from you," he said softly. "I just needed you to hear me. I needed you to know." Emma's hands clenched into fists on the table. Her chest ached, torn between reason and the undeniable pull of desire she had long buried. Her mind screamed caution, reminding her of all the lines that must not be crossed. But her heart betrayed her with every beat. She remembered every small moment from the past few years, the way Daniel had looked at her when he thought she wasn't noticing, the quiet attentiveness he had always shown, the subtle kindness that went beyond ordinary family care. She had brushed it aside then, telling herself it was nothing, that it was just familial affection. But tonight, everything had changed. His words had stripped away the careful walls she had built around herself. Emma's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She turned slightly, her hands still pressing against the table as if clinging to some part of the world she could still control. "Even if I wanted to. Even if I felt the same. It's wrong, Daniel. For all the reasons we both know. Family, age, it can't be." He shook his head gently, his expression tender but firm. "I know. I'm not asking for more than truth. I'm not asking for a future we can't have. I just couldn't keep pretending anymore." Emma's tears finally slipped, hot and fast, but she wiped them away quickly. Her heart ached with longing and grief for what could never be. She wanted to cry out, to beg for some impossible solution, but all that came was a quiet sob and a whisper. "I can't forget this. I don't think I could ever forget this." Daniel nodded, his own eyes glistening in the dim light. "Neither can I," he said. "I'll carry this with me, even if it stays unspoken between us. I'll respect you, Emma, and I'll never let anyone know what I've said tonight. But I couldn't leave without telling you. I couldn't leave without being honest." Emma's shoulders sagged, the weight of their mutual understanding pressing down on her. For the first time in years, she felt seen not just as a responsible aunt, not just as Laura's sister, but as a woman with desires, with feelings, with a heart capable of longing. And yet, with that recognition came a quiet ache, a bitter sweetness she couldn't shake. She took a shaky breath and finally looked up at him fully. Her eyes met his, and in them she saw honesty, pain, longing, and love, the same emotions she could not deny in herself. She spoke, her voice small but firm. "Daniel, I can't let this happen, but what you've said, it matters. It matters more than I can say." He reached out just to gesture, his hand hovering briefly in the space between them, a silent promise of understanding rather than a touch. "Then I'll stay here," he said softly. "I'll stay as someone who cares, quietly, without overstepping. But you should know, nothing I feel will ever change." Emma's chest tightened further. She wanted to hold him, to let herself lean into the warmth he offered, but she couldn't. And yet the thought of moving away, of ignoring him, felt impossible. It was as if the night had created a bond that could not be broken, no matter how much reason told her it must. For several minutes, they stood in silence. The clock ticked steadily, each beat echoing their shared secret, each second stretching longer than the last. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll never forget tonight, Daniel. Neither will you. I know. A maybe. Somehow that's enough for now. He nodded, understanding the depth behind her words. For now, he echoed, letting the words linger in the still air between them. As he stepped back toward the hallway, she felt an unexpected emptiness, a sense of longing that didn't fade even as he disappeared from view. The house seemed too quiet now, the shadows deeper, and her own heartbeat louder than ever. Emma walked to her bedroom, her body exhausted and trembling from the storm of emotions inside her. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, pressing a hand to her chest. The ache was real, raw, and yet beautiful, a reminder that even in the impossibility of it all, they had dared to be honest. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she whispered to herself a question that had no answer. Why does it feel so right when I know it's so wrong? Tears fell freely now, and she let herself cry, mourning the impossibility, the danger, and the longing that pulsed between them. Yet even through the pain, there was a strange, undeniable warmth, this secret spark that neither distance, reason, nor time could extinguish. Outside her window, the night sky stretched endlessly, the moon casting a pale glow over the quiet street. It was serene, peaceful, almost mocking in its calmness. Yet inside, Emma's heart raced with a secret she would carry for a long time. It's a confession that had changed everything, even if nothing could come of it. And in that quiet, heavy night, she understood something profound. Sometimes the heart sees truth that the mind cannot yet accept. Sometimes honesty itself is the most dangerous and the most beautiful thing in the world. Emma lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every word Daniel had said, every look he had given her. She knew life would continue. That morning would come, that the family would be back in its normal rhythm. But she also knew that something had shifted forever. The confession lingered, like a candle's glow in a dark room, soft, intimate, impossible to ignore. And though nothing could happen, and though they were bound by the world's rules, Emma knew one thing with certainty. The night had given them something neither of them could ever take back. It's a quiet truth that would live in the spaces between them forever. Emma's lips trembled. Do you realize what you're saying? Do you realize what this means? Daniel's gaze never wavered. He nodded once. For once, I don't want to hide what I feel. I want you to know. And there it was, the truth laid bare. Spoken into the stillness of the night, Emma pressed a hand against her chest as though trying to steady the storm inside. She wanted to cry, to shout, to laugh, to run, but all she could do was sit there staring at him, her heart breaking and blooming all at once. The clock on the wall ticked on, marking each passing second. But for Emma, time had stopped. Daniel had just torn open a door she had kept locked for years, and now there was no closing it again. Emma's chest rose and fell in quick, uneven breaths. She had heard confessions in her life before, but none had ever left her trembling like this one. None had ever felt so dangerous or so true. Her first instinct was to shut it down, to remind Daniel of who she was, of the lines that could never be crossed, of the rules that kept a family together. But the words caught in her throat, trapped by the intensity in his eyes. Finally, she forced herself to speak. Daniel, you can't say things like that. You don't understand. I'm older. She stopped abruptly, her voice cracking. She couldn't bring herself to finish, 'cause the rest of the sentence. I'm not supposed to feel this way, too, was a truth she wasn't ready to admit aloud. Daniel leaned closer, his expression open, honest, vulnerable in a way that stripped her defenses bare. He didn't touch her, didn't dare, but his presence was overwhelming all the same. I do understand, he said quietly, his voice steady but threaded with emotion. I've thought about this for a long time. I've fought it, questioned it, told myself it was wrong. But it never went away. You're not just my aunt's sister to me, Emma. You're the one person I admire. It's the one who makes me want to be better. The words struck her like an arrow. She wanted to deny them, to shake her head, to insist that it was just a phase, just youthful confusion. But deep down, she knew he meant it. His voice carried no hesitation, no false charm, only truth. Emma turned away, unable to meet his gaze. Her hands trembled where they rested on the table, and she pressed them into her lap to still them. "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered, though the weakness in her voice betrayed her. "Yes, I do," Daniel insisted, his tone firmer now. "I know exactly what I'm saying, and I know what it means." His conviction both terrified and stirred her. For years, Emma had lived quietly, her life shaped by duty to family, to her sister, to the role she had always played as the dependable one. She had buried her own needs so deep she almost forgot they existed. But now, in one bold confession, Daniel had unearthed them. The betrayal wasn't his words, it was her heart's response. Because the truth was, she had noticed him too. She had noticed the way he carried himself differently in the last few years. The confidence in his step, the kindness in his smile. She had noticed the way his laughter could lighten a heavy moment. How his presence lingered with her long after gatherings ended. She had told herself it was nothing, just affection, just family. But if that were true, why did her pulse race every time his eyes lingered on her? She closed her eyes, willing the thoughts away. But they came rushing back, flooding her with warmth and guilt all at once. "Daniel," she said again, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "Do you realize what you're asking me to feel? Do you understand what this would mean for us, for your mother, for this family?" His jaw tightened, but his eyes didn't waver. "I'm not asking you for anything right now. I'm just telling you the truth. I can't pretend anymore." Emma opened her eyes. And the sight of him, the quiet strength in his posture, the raw vulnerability in his gaze, made her heart ache. He was young, yes, but not a boy. He was a man now, one who had spoken his truth without hesitation, and she was betraying herself by feeling the way she did. She pushed her chair back suddenly, the sound scraping against the hardwood floor. Standing gave her the illusion of control, but her body still trembled. "This is wrong," she said firmly, though her voice cracked. We can't even talk about this." Daniel rose too, not to block her, but simply to face her. He shook his head, his expression a mixture of pain and determination. "Pretending it doesn't exist won't make it go away. You feel it too, No, you do." The words stole her breath. She wanted to deny it, to shout no. But her silence betrayed her. Her trembling lips, the way her eyes darted from his face to the floor, the way her body swayed slightly as if pulled toward him, all of it confessed what she couldn't speak aloud. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Even if I did, it doesn't matter. Some things can't happen, Daniel. Some things shouldn't." He stepped closer, not enough to touch, but enough to close the distance. His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "But what if it's the one thing that should—" Emma's breath hitched. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, so she blinked them away quickly. "I can't," she said, shaking her head, her voice breaking under the weight of her own denial. "I can't do this." Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging slightly, but his eyes never lost their intensity. "And don't. You don't have to do anything. Just don't pretend you didn't hear me. Don't pretend it didn't mean something." Emma turned away, her hand pressing against her chest as if to quiet the storm inside. She felt like she was being pulled in two directions, sense and longing, duty and desire. And the cruelest part was that both sides of her heart were right. Her breath trembled as she whispered, more to herself than to him, "Why does the heart betray us like this?" Daniel's voice softened behind her. "Maybe it's not betrayal. Maybe it's the only time we're honest." The silence that followed was unbearable. Emma stood with her back to him, her eyes closed, her entire body trembling with the weight of what had been said. She wanted to run to escape this moment, but she also wanted to linger in the raw truth that, for once, she wasn't invisible, wasn't just the responsible sister in the background. She was seen, desired, loved. In a way she had long stopped believing was possible. But Laveth, that's what this was. Came at a cost she wasn't sure she could bear. She turned slowly, her face pale but her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She looked at Daniel, at the young man who had just appended everything with a few simple words, and she whispered the only truth she could allow herself to admit aloud. This can't happen, but in her heart, she knew it already had. The night had been long, filled with laughter, chatter, and the usual warmth that came whenever the family gathered together. Emma had always been the one who quietly took on more than her share of work during these evenings. While her sister Laura hosted and entertained, Emma made sure the table was set just right, that no one's glass ever stayed empty for too long, and that the younger cousins were kept from making too much of a mess. It was her wake quietly responsible, always dependable. By the time the last round of desserts had been cleared, Emma felt the heaviness in her legs. She leaned against the doorway of the kitchen, her eyes sweeping over the room. Half-empty glasses, crumpled napkins, and plates with smudges of chocolate cake were left behind like little reminders of joy. The house still carried the echo of voices, though everyone had gone now. The silence felt like a heavy blanket draped across the evening. Emma sighed, brushing a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. She didn't mind the work she never really had, but she always noticed how, once the noise faded, she was left behind with the quiet. And in that quiet, thoughts she usually kept hidden had a way of rising to the surface. She turned toward the sink, already prepared to start rinsing the dishes, when she heard soft footsteps behind her. She thought maybe Laura had come back to help, but when she glanced over her shoulder, it wasn't her sister, it was Daniel. He stood in the doorway, his hands casually tucked into his pockets, his tall frame filling the space in a way that startled her. She blinked, suddenly reminded that he wasn't the little boy she remembered. Daniel was 21, now grown, mature in a way that carried a presence she couldn't ignore. "You're still working?" he asked, his voice calm, steady, and strangely deep. Emma smiled faintly, trying to push away the flutter of something she didn't want to name. "Someone has to finish this," she replied lightly, gesturing toward the mountain of plates. "Your mom has probably fallen asleep by now." Daniel's lips curved into a small smile. "Need help with those?" Emma shook her head quickly. "No, Daniel. Go rest. You've already done enough." But Daniel didn't move. He stayed where he was, leaning his shoulder against the frame of the doorway, his eyes fixed on her. There was something in the way he looked at her, but intent, almost as if he was waiting for her to say more. The quiet stretched, and Emma felt her pulse quicken. Why did it feel like his presence filled the whole kitchen? She turned away, trying to distract herself with the dishes. The sound of running water filled the silence, but it didn't drown out the awareness of him. She could feel his gaze lingering, heavy and unshakable. It was different tonight, different from all the other family gatherings, different from all the other times they had exchanged small smiles or quick conversations. Emma tried to steady her breath. She told herself it was just her imagination, that she was simply tired from the long evening. But still, she couldn't ignore how his voice from earlier lingered in her chest. Deeper now than it had been years ago. Daniel finally moved, stepping into the kitchen. He picked up a towel from the counter and reached for a plate without asking again. "I can dry. If you wash," he said casually. Emma turned her head sharply, her brows furrowing. "Daniel, really, you don't have to. I'm serious." "I know," he said simply, meeting her eyes for a brief moment. "But I want to." That look, it unsettled her more than his words. She felt an unexpected warmth rising in her cheeks, and she quickly lowered her gaze back to the sink. The two of them worked quietly for a while, side by side. Their movements were unspoken, natural. She washed, he dried, setting the plates neatly onto the counter. Yet beneath the silence, Emma could feel something stirring. A quiet tension. something she didn't want to name. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, she broke the silence. You know, it's strange seeing you like this. I still remember when you were small, always running around the yard, chasing after the dog. Daniel chuckled softly. That feels like forever ago. His tone shifted, becoming softer. But I'm not that kid anymore. Emma glanced at him then, and for the briefest second, their eyes locked. She wished she hadn't looked because what she saw made her chest tighten. There was no boyish mischief in his expression, unlike a quiet intensity, something deeper, something almost searching. She quickly looked back at the sink, her fingers trembling slightly as she scrubbed the next plate. This is ridiculous, she told herself. He's Laura's son. He's still so young. And her thoughts trailed off. She didn't want to finish them when the last plate was dried and set aside. Daniel placed the towel down and leaned against the counter. He didn't move to leave, didn't even pretend he was about to say goodnight. Instead, he just looked at her again, still waiting for the right moment. Emma wiped her damp hands on her apron, her voice coming out a little tighter than she intended. Thank you for helping. Really? But you should get some rest now. Daniel nodded slowly, but there was a lingering hesitation in his eyes, like words trapped behind his lips. For a moment, Emma thought he might say something else, something she wasn't ready to hear. Her heart thudded against her ribs, and she quickly turned her back to him, pretending to adjust the faucet. "Good night, Emma," he said finally, his tone low, almost reluctant. "Good night, Daniel," she whispered. Though her voice caught slightly, the sound of his footsteps faded as he left the kitchen. And yet, even as the house returned to silence, Emma felt far from alone. His presence still lingered in the air in her chest, in the way her heartbeat refused to slow down. She stood there for a long time, staring at the clean counter, her hands resting on the edge of the sink. She told herself it was just exhaustion, just the after effect of a long day. But deep inside, she knew it was more than that. Why did it feel like he was waiting for her? Why did it feel like this was only the beginning of something she couldn't quite name, something that both frightened and pulled her in at the same time? Emma shook her head and whispered into the empty room as if saying it out loud would make it true. He's just Laura's son. Nothing more. Nothing more. But the ache in her chest told her she didn't believe it. The house had fallen into a silence so complete it felt almost unreal. After hours of voices echoing off the walls, children laughing, men arguing about sports, Laura retelling old family stories, there was nothing now but the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the wooden floor. Emma sat at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. The steam rose gently, fogging her glasses for a moment before drifting upward and disappearing into the stillness. She loved these quiet moments, though sometimes they came with a loneliness she couldn't quite shake. She had thought she was alone, but then she heard it again, those footsteps, slow, purposeful. Not the light tapping of her sister, not the hurried shuffle of a child, but something steadier. Daniel, he entered the dining room quietly, as though he didn't want to startle her, but the truth was his very presence startled her in ways she couldn't explain. He no longer carried the easy, careless air of youth. Tonight, he looked serious. His jaw was set, his shoulders squared, though his eyes were soft, as if he was fighting between boldness and hesitation. Emma forced a small smile, trying to ease the tension she suddenly felt. "Can't sleep." He shook his head. "No, not yet." Then, without asking, he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The chair scraped slightly against the wooden floor, and Emma's heart seemed to echo the sound loud, unsettled, impossible to ignore. She tried to joke, her tone lighter than the heaviness inside her chest. "Sitting down at midnight. That's dangerous. You might fall asleep at the table." But Daniel didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. His gaze was fixed on her, unwavering. "I've been wanting to tell you something," he said, his voice low. Emma blinked, caught off guard. She wrapped her hands tighter around her teacup, as if the warmth could protect her from the sudden chill running through her veins. At this hour, she teased gently, though her words came out softer. more fragile than she intended. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. I waited until everyone left. I didn't want anyone else to hear this. Her throat went dry. She could feel her pulse in her ears. Something about the way he said it, the deliberate way he had chosen this moment. This silence made her realize whatever he was about to say was no small thing. Daniel. Her voice faltered. What is it? He hesitated. His fingers brushed against the rim of the empty glass in front of him, tracing it as though searching for courage. For a moment, she almost hoped he'd change his mind, stand up and say, never mind. But instead, he lifted his eyes and locked them with hers. And in that instant, she knew. The weight of his stare, the way his lips pressed together before speaking, the way the air thickened between it all told her the truth before his. Words ever reached her. You've always been different to me, Daniel said slowly, carefully, as though each word carried more meaning than he could admit. Not just my aunt's sister, not just family. Emma's breath caught. She wanted to interrupt, to stop him before he said something dangerous, but she couldn't move. She was frozen in her chair, her hands trembling around her cup. He went on, his voice trembling only slightly. You're the one person I can't stop thinking about. The one person who's always there in my mind, no matter where I am.